Hey guys, what's going on? We can talk about the election and how it's completely retarded, or we can talk about COVID. Nothing else is happening in the world, in case you didn't notice. It's just the election and COVID. And since I talked about the election last time, guess, and you have three guesses, and the first two don't count of what I'm going to talk about. And I hate that we have to go back to this. I guess I could make some bullshit video and talk about, like, I don't know, like the latest jobs report, or like the cool things about the PS5, but like, I don't care about that. The election and COVID overshadow every single fucking thing you can think of. That, I mean, I guess if you want to watch PS5 stuff, go to another channel. I just talk about what I want to talk about. But we're going to talk about, did you know? Now, I know this may come as a shock to some people, but did you know that we take risks every day in doing every single thing that we do? The risks are usually so maniacally small, percentage-wise, if you wanted to crunch the numbers, that it's not even worth our time. It's not our time. It was not worth our time worrying about. People who do worry about these things are worrywarts or hypochondriacs or paranoid. That's how we saw them, and we still do with everything except COVID. Now, what do I mean by that? Every time you get in the car and drive anywhere, there is a very small percentage chance, but it still exists, that you will die in a car accident and never return home. That happens to, I believe, numbers of 40,000 something people a year in this country die from car accidents every single year. That's not a huge chunk of the population. Odds are you may know one, maybe two people at max have died in car accidents. Maybe a little bit more if you're lucky. It depends how many people you know, whatever. Off the top of my head, I know of like two people, but I don't know a lot of people. Regardless, odds are it's not going to happen to you. Odds are it's not going to happen to anyone in your immediate and surrounding family. Maybe it has. It certainly has to, 40,000 people, their immediate family, that's tens of thousands of, hundreds of thousands of people. But that risk always exists. Every time you go to the store or to work, you face that risk. You face that risk of a tree falling down on you. You risk anywhere time you live in a forest with trees, you run the risk of that tree falling down and killing you. That happens to a certain amount of Americans every year. It's not very high. So odds are you're not going to be a paranoid hypochondriac. Well, no, hypochondriac is not the right word for this. Paranoid in general is like, oh, I don't want to buy a house anywhere near a tree. And you'll be like, babe, we live in North Carolina. Like 95% of the country of the state is forest. I know it's not 95%, but it's something like that. Like if you live in the East Coast or like in Oregon, like there's a lot of trees. It's kind of hard to buy a house not near trees. But imagine if you were so paranoid. Yeah, but these certain amount of people die every single year because a trees falling on their houses, so we can't buy a house near trees. And you're like, babe, that's ridiculous. That's paranoid delusions. That's you're taking a thing that does exist. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but you're exponentiating it so much that you're letting it control where you want to buy a house. The small, tiny little threats that odds are will never happen to you, you're letting it influence major decisions in your life. And you're like, wait a minute, Rob, are you comparing trees falling down on people to COVID? Like, no, that's not what I'm doing. Don't put words in my mouth. Don't strawman me. I've been strawmanned enough to last a lifetime. God, arguing with people is just like argue against my point, not some other thing you made up and attack and saying this is your point. And I'm like, no, it's not, and that's the entire argument. So where am I going with this? Back to the car thing. There have been studies done that the same principle applies. I'm not saying it's the exact same threat because obviously 40,000 people a year is less than the amount of people that have died from COVID. Now, I don't even believe that inflated number, but even if it's just hypothetically, I'm not saying it is, don't put words in my mouth, hypothetically, if it's only 1/4 of the number they say it is, that's still way more than auto accidents. I'm talking about the principle is the same, that you make logical, rational choices, and everything you do has a small amount of risk to it. One thing being, driving. But you accept that risk, that low, instant, tiny little risk that odds are will never happen to you, as the price you pay to be able to drive to go to the store or to work. The convenience, the speed in which you can do things is worth the tiny, tiny, tiny 0.0000 whatever, like it's ridiculously small, risk you face while driving. Now, obviously, in certain areas of the country, it is higher. Like if you live in a big city, yeah, the risk of you getting into an auto accident, maybe not lethal because you can't drive very fast in the city, is going to be much higher because there's just more people versus a rural area. Now, what do we do with this risk? This risk that we drive vehicles that can kill people in an instant. What do we do? Well, we take as many precautions as we can to drive safely, to lower that risk, which is already low as it is, to make it even lower. Not speeding ridiculously high. I'm not saying not speeding at all. I know everyone drives a little bit above the speed limit because the speed limit is so ridiculously low, but you don't just fly 80 and a 30. No, you don't. You go kind of around 35, and that's about it. You pay attention to your surroundings. You use your blinkers. You fully stop at stop signs. You are aware of your surroundings. You know what's going on. You see if someone's driving erratically. You get away from them. You look ahead to see if someone is like swerving into your lane. You do these things to lower the risk that you know is present. Most of the NPCs that are crying out about COVID do all of this probably without even realizing it. They don't realize that they make conscious decisions every single day to do something that could involve their death, and they do certain things to mitigate it, and that's how they live their lives. That is the way we have always lived our lives since the beginning of time, and that's the way we always will, because that's life. Life has risk. You can never minimize all risk. I don't understand these people that think that we can just stay in our homes indefinitely until there are literally no cases at all, or till no one ever dies again. I'm like, that is not possible. Now, where am I going with this car thing? We can continue with the car thing, but we can do that with anything else. Anytime you buy food, even though it says it's been approved by the there's always a chance that they missed something or did something incorrectly or didn't actually approve it, and you could get food poisoning and die. That doesn't happen to a lot of people, but it does happen. But you accept that very, very low risk of that happening for the convenience of buying food that you didn't personally prepare yourself, okay? Like the convenience and the price outweighs the incredibly small risk to your life. And we do this, again, that's another example with driving, with food, with going to a movie theater, going anywhere in a public place where there might be a mass shooting, for example. Going out in the wilderness where we might fall off a hiking trail or get attacked by a bear or struck by lightning or, I don't know, working with power tools, doing home improvement projects, like every single thing you can think of. Even drinking water. People choke on water all the time and die. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. Every single thing you do, there is a risk to your life, and you do logical, rational things to minimize that risk to as low as possible. So it's acceptable to you to do that in exchange for the convenience or the speed or the price or whatever the situation is. It may not be even a necessity. For example, people who ride bikes, not to get anywhere to go run errands or get to work, but just ride bikes for fun. There's always a risk that you may die from riding a bike. Either you fall off or a car hits you the bike path near a road or something. That's always a risk. Every single time you go out biking, there is a very small chance, but there's a chance you may die. But again, you take precautions, logical, rational precautions to lower that risk to as low as possible. Like you don't go out at night. You go during a day where people can see you. You don't wear dark clothing. If you're going at night, you wear reflective gear. You don't go on busy highways. You go on like neighborhood roads or bike trails or something like that. Like everything, I can go on and on and on for everything, but you get my point. Now imagine if we did that with COVID. Imagine if everyone took precautions that still kept up the convenience and the benefits of having the strong economy we had before COVID. For example, first of all, people just wash their fucking hands more often. It is disgusting how many people I have seen use the bathroom and don't wash their hands at all. If we just washed our hands regularly, as you should, as I do my entire life, if everyone did what I did and just wash their fucking hands, that would minimize spread by a fuck ton. Basic hygiene when it comes to like you touch something in a store, then you touch your nose or your face or something, like just don't do that. Just don't. Wait until you wash your hands when you get home or something, or bring hand sanitizer. Like just basic things that don't require something as invasive as a national mask mandate policy, as Biden proclaims, or shutting down huge segments of the economy, putting millions upon millions of people out of work, destroying thousands of businesses, ruining people's decades and decades of work into their own businesses, putting people on the streets, making people starve for food or don't have money for medicine. The alternative, all of that crap we have been dealing with since March, I just mentioned, could be mitigated. The risk will not go away. There's always a risk. If you just had basic hygiene and only went out when basically you needed to. You go to the store when you need to, not when you want to, when it's convenient, or like when you want to pick up more fast food for the 10,000th time this week. Americans spend abhorrent amount of money on food and fast food, eating out in general. And yeah, you go out occasionally. I've been out occasionally since the pandemic. It's not reckless. God forbid I want to go out every once in a while. But these people who go to the clubs every single freaking weekend, they're more at risk for this than me. Again, if we just did basic precautions, if each person actually took responsibility for their own actions and didn't wait for the government to force them to do things, if they just did basic stuff, it's not that hard to wash your hands. It's not like wearing a mask or limiting the amount of people in stadiums or stores or shutting down, but like everything I just mentioned, I don't want to go back down the rabbit hole. If they just did that, that would lessen the spread by, I'm guessing, more than half. It would lessen it so much. That'd be so much more manageable to for the hospitals and healthcare workers to deal with if people just fucking gave a shit instead of voting in for authoritarians to force everyone else to do it. Now back to the driving thing. There have been studies done that whenever the speed limit is lower to 25 miles an hour, it doesn't matter what the road is, that deaths are lowered to almost zero. Now you're saying if the government treated that auto accident deaths like COVID, what would they do? They would say, for everyone's safety, tens of thousands of people die in auto accidents every single year. The number's only increasing. It was 30,000 several years ago. Now it's bumped up to 40,000. Now I think it's above 40,000. I'll put the exact number up on my screen. I don't have it in front of me, but it's not 50,000 yet. But it keeps on increasing every single year. The government would, in the media, would hype the problem up like a motherfucker. Every single person died. Every single time a person died from an auto accident, they would plaster it over the screen for days, and they would just keep up the fear mongering day after day after day. So the average dumbass viewer would think that people are literally dying every single time they go out. They think the problem would be astronomically worse than what it actually is. We've seen that again. I've done previous videos where people thought that literally people would ask how many people have died from COVID and they would give an answer, and the average answer was 100 times more than the actual amount of people dying from COVID. And that's with the artificial inflated number that we're not going to get into that. I've already been through that. There's no point in debating that again. But even if you accept the number that CDC says, the average person's answer was 100 times more than that. That's how bad they think COVID is. It's actually 1/100th of the problem they think it is. So that's what the government media would do, inject that into people's heads for months and months and months, and then say, in order to combat this pandemic of people dying on the roads, we're going to limit all speeds to 25 miles an hour. It doesn't matter if you're on the highway or interstate, it doesn't matter. It's 25 miles an hour, and we will enforce that vigorously. If you go 26 miles an hour, a cop will be on you. We're going to have cops every 500 feet, whatever, to combat this surge. Now, ordinary people will be like, what the fuck? I'm a safe driver. I've never been in an accident in my life. There is no fucking reason why I need to go 25 on an interstate when the speed limit is 75, and you're going to increase my commute by like 5 times. It's going to take me like 2 hours to get to work. Truckers are going to be like, you have just increased the amount of time it takes to ship anything by 5 times. We're already struggling to ship things to people. Now it's going to be 5 times as hard. People would collectively push back and say the convenience of being able to drive not 25 miles an hour, the effect it has on their commute and on shipping and transportation, the negative effect of that 25 miles an hour hard speed limit nationwide is too great compared to the amount of lives it would save. They would say, no, I don't care if 40,000 people die a year, auto accidents. I'm not doing this. It's too much of a burden for me for my commute to work. I would be gone for like 14 hours a day. Shipping companies were like, we can't operate at these speeds. We're going to have to shut down. We can't do it. It would take too long to ship everything. Goodbye to Amazon 2-day Prime shipping. That's not going to exist anymore. Everything you order online is going to take 5 times as long to get anywhere, and probably much more expensive because truckers are wasting gas just chugging along the interstate. In that situation, we would determine that the effect it would have on the economy and our personal lives is greater than people's actual lives. Now, what happens when you do this with COVID? When you're like, the side effects of these shutdowns is greater than people's lives. People squawk and yell at you saying, you're killing grandma, you don't care if people die, you're heartless, you only care about money, whatever. But yet they would totally do that with cars. Now you would say, oh, you're comparing 40,000 to, I believe it's 260,000 right now. No, the amount doesn't matter. I've been told that even if it saves just one life, it's totally worth Everything else, people's lives are the most important thing. That's what I've been told countless times for over half a year by these dumb liberal fuck ups. That people's lives trumps everything else, the economy, people's businesses, people's livelihoods, mortgages, rent, whatever intangible thing, even if it's tangible, everything that's not living is less important than people's lives. So if people treated COVID like they did with the speed limit, they would say it doesn't matter if it's only 40,000. If it just saves one life, it's totally worth it. And the people who are privileged who get to work from home or aren't shippers, they would totally be okay with driving 25 miles an hour everywhere because it doesn't affect them. They don't care. Sure, it takes them a little longer to go run errands and everything, but they don't care. And they would try to feel morally superior to you and look down on you if you ever suggest, well, no, I think we can go faster. Like, just if everyone just was a good fucking driver. Oh, and we enforced harsher penalties for like DUI or for people who are reckless driving. Then that would help too. If you just accidentally run over someone and kill them, if we treated auto accidents like murder, then people would take driving much more seriously. People do not take driving seriously at all. People get drunk, run over family of four, and get like 2 years, and then like 5 years probation. Like, oh, big deal. I just ruined a family forever, but no big deal, man. It was an accident. I didn't mean to, so it's no big deal. So that's the parallel I am making with this. I'm not saying that 40,000 auto accidents is the same as 260,000 COVID deaths. That's the thing that I despise when I argue with people with like, you're comparing apples to oranges. This thing isn't like COVID. I'm like, I'm not saying it's like COVID. The reason why you draw parallels is because you are comparing something that's unfamiliar or that you're trying to convince someone of and something that is familiar. They're inherently different. Anything I can compare COVID to, you could just shut down the argument saying, oh, it's not COVID. It's like, I know, I'm not saying it is. What I'm saying is we're reacting to this small risk the same. We're reacting to these two small risks completely differently. I'm saying is why the double standard? Why do you treat the driving situation I mentioned with 25 miles per hour? You would say, a normal person would say, that is too much of a price for shipping and people's commutes to pay in order to save 40,000 people. But why do you say that destroying our economy and all the things I mentioned, I'm not going to repeat it, all of the negative side effects from these lockdowns is worth saving 260,000? Why? What's the cutoff? Is when it hits six digits? Like, what amount of COVID deaths would not be acceptable for this? You're saying 40,000 wouldn't be acceptable. So what would 100,000, 150,000? Like, where's the artificial cutoff for you? What study or algorithm or model you're using to determine what is an acceptable amount of people to die for the economy and for people's commute, whatever. What's acceptable and not acceptable is just what you feel like. Is it what the media tells you acceptable and not acceptable? Like, there's no basis for all of this. And that's what I'm trying to point out. For the average person, as I'm putting up on the screen now, the likelihood of you dying from COVID is so ridiculously small. It is not even 0.1% for most people. Now, that is a bit higher. Now, I know I can't calculate what's the risk every time you drive, what's the risk of you dying, because that determines how long you drive, where you are in the country. But the principle remains the same, that both risks are extremely low. That for the average person driving, they don't have to worry about it. If you're driving in New York City all the time for hours and hours and hours, yeah, you better be careful. That is a much higher risk, maybe not necessarily of a fatality, because you can't pick up a lot of speed in New York City, but certainly of an auto accident in general, a fender bender, because you're just driving around so many fucking people for so long that your risk is higher than you randomly driving in, I don't know, Kansas City. But yet we still find it acceptable. The vast majority of people have no threat from COVID whatsoever. 80% of people are asymptomatic. So when people are constantly whining about, oh, we have 2,000 cases, we have the highest cases in 5 months. Okay, take any bullshit number you're giving us, which that's probably inflated as fuck, and slash that by 4/5. So you don't have to care about 80% of whatever number you give me. 80% doesn't matter because they're asymptomatic. They require no treatments. They require no hospitalization. They just they just live their lives like normal. They should quarantine to avoid spreading to people who may have more adverse reaction to it. So at worst, they quarantine for 14 days. But as far as the healthcare system that people are currently whining about, the hospitalizations, 80% of those people don't even have to care about. Nope, write it off as they're just going to quarantine, they're going to be fine. 80% of people display no symptoms whatsoever. Out of the 20% that do, it's only like 1% of people that require hospitalizations. Maybe even less than that. Most people who have symptoms have mild symptoms and they just wait it out at home. Only a small percentage even have severe symptoms. And out of those severe symptoms, only a small amount of those actually require hospitalizations. So don't let that fear monger where you're like, I don't know, I think I saw it today. Virginia has 2,300 cases. Okay, let me do the math right now for you. So if they had 2,300 cases, only 460 of them would ever display symptoms. So you can write off the other 1,840 as literally not a problem to deal with at all. No healthcare worker has to deal with them. No hospitalization has to house them. The system, our nation, does not have to deal with that. That is not a problem. Out of those 460 that have symptoms, only 92 will have severe symptoms and or require hospitalization. I don't have the exact breakdown of out of the people who have severe symptoms, how many people need hospitalization. That one I have not found. But regardless, it's a small percentage of that. Why the fuck are we fear mongering with all of these high numbers of cases when you can write off 80% of them right off the bat and then write off another chunk of that remaining 20% as no fucking big deal? Just, yeah, the severe cases suck. They suck. Makes you feel like crap. It's like the flu. Everyone I know who's ever had the flu says it literally feels like they're dying. And these are people that don't exaggerate things, that don't know each other from all different walks of life, and they all say the exact same thing. It leads me to believe that the flu does majorly suck. Severe COVID symptoms do majorly suck. But is it worth shutting down the entire economy for such a long period of time? We're coming up in December. It started in March. That's 9 months of this bullshit. For what?